Karl Marx was a spy and even a danger to the left. Now, the Bible of socialism is the complete work of Karl Marx. Pseudo-scientific gibberish. Why him of all people? How could one of the worst texts of modern social and economic philosophy become the foundation of a worldwide movement? Why wasn't a better text from another author selected? Something easier to read and easier to understand. Why did Marx have a leading status in the communist movement during his lifetime, even though he sabotaged various newspapers and organizations during his career, and even though he was always looking for a pointless fight with his peers? Now, classical conspiracy theorists will say that Marx was a Jew and inevitably part of a Jewish world conspiracy. But since the Jewish world conspiracy was only an invention of the Anglo-American and Russian propaganda and its intelligence agencies, we must find better answers. There's only been one serious, detailed study of Marx as a possible agent so far. Apart from that, there are a few articles, half-baked conspiracy theories, and a few dubious anecdotes. And then, of course, you have thousands and thousands of regular books about Karl Marx and his philosophy. So it's almost impossible that by accident you stumble upon something that actually looks at the intelligence side of all of this. Now, let's get this out of the way first. The maternal grandmother of Karl was Nanette Salomon, born Cohen, and the maternal grandfather was Isaac Heymans Pressburg, who's originally from Hungary. They got married in 1785. Nanette was the daughter of Salomon Baron Cohen, brother of the wealthy Levi Baron Cohen, who was a financier in England. Through his children, Levi Baron Cohen was connected with almost all leading Jewish families in England. Hannah married banking superstar Nathan Meyer Rothschild. Judith married Moses Montefiore. Jesse married Maya Davidson. And the other children married into the Goldsmith, Samuel, and Lucas families. Now, these distant connections are interesting, especially because the Rothschilds raised money for Bismarck, and Prussia relied on the Rothschilds' information network abroad instead of setting up their own proper foreign intelligence service. In addition, the Rothschild family handled large sums of money for the British Crown and played the role of Jewish nouveau riche upstarts. Now, classic conspiracy literature believes in the fairy tale that 5 brothers from the tiny Rothschild clan took control of the British colonial empire undisturbed and with impunity through banking. Now, the whole thing is always garnished with a fake quote attributed to Nathan about not having to worry about who sits on the British throne. Now, let us not forget that for decades, the first important Rothschild slowly had to tender himself to the noble family of Hessen-Kassel, which was closely related to the British throne, as a kind of elite accountant, and he wired or smuggled money from the British Crown to the troops hundreds of kilometers away. So this was just providing a service, right? Over time, the men of the tiny Rothschild clan became strawmen of the British colonial empire, attracting the attention of ordinary citizens and distracting from the nobility with huge palaces and lavish parties. Now, the royal houses competing with the British in Europe were less suspicious of Jewish money than British money. And we'll come back to those, we'll get back to those nobility circles and these aristocrats in just a few minutes, because this is important. You know, this is not just to explain that a handful of Jewish bankers did not take over the British colonial empire, but the British colonial empire employed, among other people, a few Jews to be bookkeepers and bankers and to wire large sums of money. Now, of course, when you're dealing with intelligence matters, you always have to question true ownership of companies, because what modern capitalism, what we think of it, grew out of this old network of noble families, and they didn't play by any rules but their own. And so ultimately, he or she who has the bearer bonds hidden away in a safe is the true owner. And what you see as supposed owners in public might not be or are probably not the real owners. Now, through his father, Karl Marx got to know Baron Ludwig of Westphalia, who possessed power and prestige, had connections to the upper classes of Great Britain and Scotland. And of course, this was also a connection with the power circles of Prussia. The Baron was very different from Karl's subservient father, and Karl later dedicated his doctoral thesis to him. One has to assume that on the long walks together, Ludwig conveyed much more to young Karl than just Shakespeare and some early socialist thinking. Now, the family of Westphalen had deep ties to the intelligence services and secret societies, who always wanted to be well informed about revolutionary groups and ideological networks. So this was just the intelligence and secret police business. Ludwig von Westphalen, of all people, would have suggested to Marx, or is supposed to have suggested to Marx, the ideas of Saint-Simon's socialism. Now, my educated guess, and I will explain that further, my educated guess, on the other hand, is that he hired Marx as an informer. Now, at the high school in Trier, Karl Marx and Edgar von Westphalen, brother of Jenny, Marx's later wife, already knew each other. And there are indications that students at that time spied on their teachers and reported suspicious left-wing revolutionaries or other troublesome tendencies. Now, Philipp von Westphalen became secretary of the Prussian Lieutenant General and Freemason Ferdinand von Braunschweig in 1751, brother-in-law of the Prussian king and Freemason Friedrich II. Ferdinand was also a member of the Order of the Illuminati of Bavaria, where people such as the Landgraf Karl von Hessen-Kassel also cavorted. There was also somebody from Sachsen-Coburg-Gotha in the Illuminati. And the Hessen-Kassel family was extremely closely related to the British throne, was in all probability responsible for important intelligence activities, and built up the Rothschild family in the course of time. And Hessen-Kassel also became famous or infamous for providing, renting out Hessian soldiers for the British side of the American Revolutionary War. And the British throne paid extreme sums to Hessen-Kassel, and this was most likely part of financing Hessen-Kassel's intelligence operations and other business operations. Now, Ferdinand von Braunschweig had supreme command of the Allied troops of England, Hanover, the origin of the British royal dynasty, and Prussia. Philip of Westphalen also assumed an important military function, and the British king, George III, of the House of Hanover, awarded him a high title for this. And Philip married a noblewoman with Scottish ancestors. His son was Ludwig of Westphalen, and then Ferdinand Otto in turn became Prussian Minister of the Interior and was thus responsible for espionage against revolutionary groups, such as left-wing revolutionary groups. Ludwig's daughter Jenny finally married Karl Marx, and this is kind of this interesting family dynamic. So you have to look beyond the simple conspiratorial thinking of, oh my God, he was a Jew, he must have been part of a Jewish world conspiracy, and look at the actual history and look at the intelligence, intelligence aspects of this. So, Karl Marx was intimately tied to powerful people who wanted to spy on the left, which was kind of a new thing at the time, but still significant. So, then of course, the left had its own weird connections, and we saw lots of ties to aristocracy and nobility. And we also saw the use of secret societies. So, for example, the League of the Righteous and finally the League of the Communists developed from the secret organization Bund der Geächteten, headed by the Freemason Jacob Venedy. Now, these secret organizations were modeled on the Italian Carbonari. Marx and Engels were then commissioned to write the manifesto of the Communist Party, and Marx later added the ideas contained therein to the basic communist work, the Capital or Capital. The ideas in Marx's work were anything but new. For example, 25 years earlier in The Science of Government Founded on Natural Law, Clinton Roosevelt, from the famous powerful Roosevelt family, wrote down the most important principles of socialist ideology and even postulated a theory of labor value according to which the price of goods should not be determined by supply and demand or by people just haggling about a price, but by experts on the basis of the working hours that went into their production. Now, if you look for this text by Roosevelt, The Science of Government Founded on Natural Law, you will find that it's very short. The sentences are pretty simple and short and clear to understand. And you also see how the ideas contained must have seemed, at least on the surface, attractive to the people at the time. But you also get the idea that this was just a theoretical construct. This was a theoretical idea, and this was in no shape or form ready to be implemented, or this was not well thought out. This was just a basic idea of this basic idea of all evil comes from entrepreneurship. All evils come from making a profit. All evil comes from the incentive to screw somebody else over. And so the right to own things and the right to trade things or services or whatever, these fundamental rights supposedly are the foundation of evil and oppression and of slave labor and all these things. And therefore, if you remove these incentives, if you remove these basic rights, then you create a system of government where you have these so-called experts, these government people, and they decide what should be produced for what price and what's going to be expensive and less expensive, and anticipate what people want in a couple of years and what the demand will be in a couple of years. So very simple ideas. And of course, Karl Marx, he took these very simplistic ideas and he wrote this mountain of gibberish about it, trying to make it sound scientific, trying to make it sound well thought out and ready to be implemented, right? Nailed down to the last detail. But it was ultimately just gibberish. And research has shown that when Karl Marx submitted his draft after 10 or 15 years of work, when he submitted his final draft to his publishers or his editor, it was a complete mess. It was way too long. It wasn't in even a proper form or shape. Some aspects of it were way too long, and it was hard to understand, and it was handwriting most of the time. Almost impossible to read. So it was a mountain of junk, which he delivered. So in 1849, Clinton Roosevelt and Horace Greeley, the owner of the powerful New York Tribune newspaper, one of the biggest newspapers at the time, had raised money for the Communist League in London, and Greeley gave Marx regular commissions for articles that were to appear in the newspaper. So again, you have powerful circles supporting specific communists, like Karl Marx, who has weird family relations. Now, the Communist League tried to influence revolutionary movements with actions and publications, including participation in civil war-like struggles and uprisings. There were various failed insurgency attempts, and there was turmoil all over mainland Europe, but in Great Britain, there was relative calm, because, of course, Britain was protecting itself through intelligence circles and methods. Karl Marx denounced his opponents and critics from left-wing circles as informers and agents. He accused everybody He argued extensively with a Mr. Vogt, who was denounced as a French spy and an anonymous flyer. Vogt, in turn, accused Marx of blackmailing German revolutionaries for money from London, threatening to supply confidential information to the German authorities. Now, in this context, Marx tried in vain to sue the national newspaper in Prussia and wrote a lengthy reply to Mr. Vogt for almost a whole year. So Marx was attacking everybody and creating this level of distrust, even though he basically never had a point. And if you look at Marx on the whole, he seems to be the agent. Now, Wolfgang Waldner published a detailed but left-wing ideologically colored study about Marx being an agent or having been an agent. And this is an interesting book. Contains many quotes for illustration, kind of the only real study of the question of was Marx an agent. The core thesis is that Marx took a leading position in the socialist movement on behalf of his noble married relatives from Prussia to spy on socialists and ideologically drive the movement in a direction that was useful to the Prussian nobles. Marx seemed like the right candidate. He was aggressive and narcissistic, but engaging and nice if necessary. He was smart, but not too clever. He was ambitious, but without a really persevering work ethic. And Marx married Jenny von Westphalen, thanks to his father's connections. And the Marx-friendly historians try to make it look as if there were tensions between Jenny and her family. Even the facts show rather normal family relationships. Now, the left today is very hesitant to get into all of this. They want to avoid that topic. They want to paint Marx as a true revolutionary. Now, at the time, Prussia's police authorities used harsh methods and a lot of informers to break up, destroy, arrest, and drive away unwanted political groups. Now, if necessary, evidence was falsified and fabricated for this purpose, and provocateurs were inserted into groups. And as the socialists from Europe and Russia cooperated with each other all over the place, various secret services stepped on each other's feet without knowing about each other. So you had these radical left-wing circles and lots of spies and lots of informers in there from different countries. The situation became even more complicated when a socialist spied simultaneously for several secret services or police authorities from different countries and collected money for his information from several handlers. And of course, a socialist could offer his services as an informer with the intention of deception and only deliver small fish to his commanding officer and feed disinformation. And Karl Marx's father, Heinrich, formally converted from Judaism to Christianity because only then was he allowed to continue working as a lawyer because of anti-Semitic laws. Heinrich was certainly not happy, but it did not trigger a revolutionary attitude or the desire to overthrow the Prussian authorities. He was a kind of liaison between the Prussian government and the Jewish community, which of course leaves room for speculation as to whether more information had flowed in one direction or the other than would have been absolutely necessary. Marx studied listlessly and aimlessly in Berlin and also snooped around the oppositional doctoral club. He worked on Bruno Bauer and feigned friendship with him, but drove him into isolation. Marx was ultimately a wrecker. He infiltrated organizations, then caused vicious disputes, chaos, and legally sensitive provocations, and somehow always got away with it himself. Now, this may be partially due to his narcissistic and or psychopathic personality, or he did so specifically on behalf of the Westphalians and earned himself extra money. For a really elaborate university degree, he lacked the patience and perseverance, and so he quickly obtained a PhD in philosophy in Jena, which had been quite a simple feat at the time. And you can't find an original of this work, so we can't actually check if this was just plagiarized. Had someone tipped him off and perhaps helped him in an intermediary capacity? At the Rheinische Zeitung, the newspaper, he became an unofficial editor-in-chief, although he had published almost nothing so far, and received an impressive 600 Thaler annual salary. Now, did he get this post with the help of his relatives? And Marx used his position for unnecessary attacks, although socialism was still completely theoretical, and nobody could really say which of these ideas might actually work. The Rheinische newspaper was controlled pseudo-opposition, false controlled opposition under the watchful eye of the Prussian authorities. Of course, and Marx was, of course, at this point related to the Prussian authorities. And even Mr. Oppenheim from the famous banking family who had links to the Rothschilds and worked as an assessor in the Prussian judiciary was also on board. Together with Bankhaus or Banking House Mendelssohn from Berlin, Oppenheim was commissioned from 1818 to organize French war compensation for Prussia. And don't get yourself misled. So it wasn't that the Rothschild Bank could the Rothschild Bank could do anything it wanted at the time. Like, they collected loans and they financed all these wars as they saw fit, not caring what the British Empire might think. It didn't work that way. Didn't work that way. If a small family of bankers had acted against the interests of the British colonial empire, you know, the empire would have just destroyed these handful of bankers, and of course stole the money. Now, this newspaper was finally banned, and Marx set off to woo the wealthy Arnold Ruge, who planned the Noon magazine. Marx again had this usual effect, which can only be described as sabotage, and he collected donations for his own pocket. And then young Russian aristocrats like Mikhail Bakunin showed interest in socialism, but were probably agents of the Russian Tsarist secret service Okhrana. They came across European communist circles infiltrated by European secret services. It was a real spy orgy. Everybody was kind of spying for someone. Now, some comrades accused Marx of preaching the eternal wait for revolution. At some point in the distant future, the people will spontaneously rise and overthrow the current system. Others accused Marx of dumb provocations at the wrong time, thereby getting socialist groups into trouble. In 1845, he went to Brussels and infiltrated Wilhelm Weitling's organization, Association of Craftsmen. Marx should have had enough money in the bank for several years, but he was unusually wasteful and begged his friends like Engels for money, who in turn made contact with Robert Owen, British entrepreneur, early socialist, founder of the cooperative system. Marx always flattered his way into a new group and then caused unnecessary arguments and divisions, formulating his attacks against comrades in the same tattled, largely incomprehensible writing style, which he used for his treatises instead of saying in clear words what he disliked. Now, it's one thing to criticize a comrade and say, I really don't like this for such and such reasons, but it's a whole nother ballgame if you blabber in this sort of Karl Marx way. You don't make any sense, you contradict yourself, it's incomprehensible, but you're still viciously attacking that other person. With his close confidants like Moses Hess, he infiltrated Weitling's secret alliance, Bund der Geächteten, and soon attacked the previously high acclaimed Weitling. Even Proudhon was fought, early socialist. Marx and Engels took over the League of the Just and turned it into the League of the Communists, from which the Socialist International finally emerged. And that these two of all people became the prophets of socialism is extremely bizarre, since they were much more competent, diplomatic, understandable, and less dogmatic comrades. And then Marx completed his Communist Manifesto and Capital, and that became the Bible of socialism for a weird reason. So, on the one hand, Marx preached gibberish and waiting for the world revolution. On the other hand, he spent money from his mother to buy weapons for revolutionary actions that always ended in failure and chaos. So, he sabotaged on both the ideological and the practical level. In the Cologne Workers' Association, Marx used his usual techniques to gain control, to radicalize and dogmatize, and to disrupt the organization. At the Neue Rheinische newspaper, he was made editor-in-chief, and other confidants were all brought on board. Paper had suspicious investors, so again, this looked like controlled opposition. In very troubled times, Marx and his people agitated against the Hohenzollern aristocrats in Prussia and the monarchs in Prussia. And despite harsh laws, Marx and Engels stirred up radicalism in the audience and drove people into a hopeless fight, pointless fight, whereupon the Prussian authorities had the excuse to intervene rigorously. Attempts at revolution were brutally suppressed, and Marx always got away, or he was always at a distance. Marx afterwards criticized those involved in the failed insurrection attempt, and Engels was shockingly well informed about the battles. This is all very, very suspicious. And then that newspaper was finished, of course. Marx and Engels moved from big city to big city in Germany. Afterwards, Marx, for whom the territory had become too dangerous, went to London and lived there in luxurious dwellings with servants and balls. But he still wasted all his money. He tried to finance his lifestyle with whining, begging letters and appeals for donations, as well as with one or the other author jobs thrown his way by influential people. Another project was an aid fund for political refugees who flocked to London, which was strangely successful, while similar organizations from other operators remained unsuccessful. How can we explain this? As a spy, Marx could theoretically have taken information about the political refugees and embezzled some of the money. Maybe Marx got a grant from his commanding officer. From London, Marx could watch members of the Communist League, which he had infiltrated and divided with Engels, gradually being arrested and brought to justice in Cologne. Marx had a familiar contempt for the Russian Tsarist Empire, as the politician David Urquhart, and the two theorized in Urquhart's magazine Free Press about Russian conspiracies and Russian espionage. Now, the Russian Secret Service gradually infiltrated communist circles in and outside Russia. Marx and Engels published articles against Russia in the most influential newspaper of the United States at the time, which is something, of course, the communists later tried to bury, because this was very embarrassing. So then, Marx took control of the so-called First International and ran the organization reliably into the ground. He died in London on March 14th, 1883, at the age of 64. Lenin's brother had translated texts by Marx and was allegedly involved in an assassination plot against the Tsar. Lenin himself referred to Marx and raised him to a quasi-holy figure. And then young Stalin, came into contact with Marxist circles in the seminary of Tbilisi in 1893 and was recruited by the Tsarist Secret Service, Okhrana. And in Germany or Prussia, Bismarck had the socialists infiltrated and steered. They wanted a calm and stupid social democratic party. And it was probably also due to Prussia's and Britain's influence that German social democracy and the international socialists chose Marx's incomprehensible texts as holy scriptures. And then, of course, it became this huge political cult. So again, if you look at Karl Marx and socialism and the rise of socialism, if you look at this from an intelligence standpoint, you can estimate with a certainty of, I'd say, about 80% that Marx was indeed somebody's agent. He was indeed working as an informer, as a wrecker, and his stuff was pushed. His stuff was pushed by influential people as the basis of socialism. So whenever people today are marching against capitalism or what they perceive as capitalism, you know, the corruption and the criminality, when they march against that, you always have kind of this ideological foundation of Karl Marx and the heritage of communist revolution. So this is what some people are hoping for. in America, in Europe, and other parts of the world, some are hoping and waiting for this revolution just to come, just to arrive, just to happen, while others are deliberately plotting for a violent revolution. But this is something we've seen during the Cold War. This is something we've seen earlier. And never did this sort of communist revolution happen in the West, because we have the same issues today, and we had the same issues in the Cold War with espionage and the intelligence agencies. So there's a great level of control over left-wing radical circles. A lot of control by police and intelligence agencies. And there's also a certain number of leading communists or leading socialists who are working for the system or working for intelligence agencies. We can safely assume that, or we have to work under the assumption that this is the case. But it's not just important people who are under control. It's also the ideology itself that is under control, has always been under control of intelligence agencies and secret societies. The elites, the established circles, the established empires who sell themselves as capitalist. So you have to re-examine the history of socialism and the ideology itself. Reduce it to its basic ideas, to its basic concepts of where evil is supposed to come from, where evil supposedly comes from, like the family and the right to own things and the right to trade things. And don't fall for this left versus right game. Don't be caught up fighting your fellow human being or your family members over these ideological issues. Don't fight your neighbors or your family members before you have a solid education in these intelligence matters and how the superpowers worked and how these circles still function today. So I can't just imagine. I mean, I've read Marx's work, or I tried to read it as hard as I could in German, but man, those translations must be crazy, because it's even less. It's even less. It's even more chaotic and more gibberish when you translate it into some other language. Right. So, and of course, the conspiracy movement, they need to show some progress. They need to think further and educate themselves further. You can't just view everything as a Jewish world conspiracy and use that as a springboard for fascism, to promote fascism, to promote racism, and to turn this into a big cult, because that's not going to work. It's not going to serve your interests. And all this talk about communist revolution, all this talk about revolution today, it's just going to antagonize the right wing or the people in the center in the political center. It's just going to antagonize them and just embolden your opponents, right? It's just going to create more chaos. And same goes for the right wing or the ultra right wing. The more you turn fascist, the more you dehumanize your political opposition, the left, the more you threaten them and treat them as subhuman beings, the more you will embolden the left, the more you will make it stronger. And what was the result of the Cold War in terms of ideology in the West? Nothing was solved, nothing was achieved. The left didn't get their revolution, and the right wing didn't get its revolution. And now we have kind of the worst of all worlds. We have the worst elements of fascism and autocracy and corruption. And we also have kind of a socialist, strong socialist elements in these Western countries today. So yeah, go read some interesting books, find some interesting stuff out there. Don't just watch YouTube. As a matter of fact, you should actually stop watching YouTube. Grab some good books and learn about intelligence matters, form your own opinions, and form some real solutions. If you like this video, please comment down below, subscribe to this channel, support us on Patreon, and watch some more stuff, because we actually read books, and we make videos that are similar to what you would consider an audiobook to be like.